Hello everyone. Back again with film recaps. In this video, I'm going to recap one of the psychological thriller films from 2023, titled Cat Person. Before we get to the storyline, I'd like to wish everyone a happy and great day. Without further ado, let's get straight to the storyline. The movie begins with a college student named Margot who works part-time at a movie theater in the evenings. One day, during her usual shift, she meets an older guy named Robert, whom she finds attractive. She quickly develops a crush on him and tries to strike up a conversation about movies, but Robert doesn't seem interested and ignores her as he heads into the theater. Later, while Margot is returning home at night, she fears someone might attack her, so she updates her best friend, Taylor, about her location. Upon reaching her dorm room, she suddenly comes across a dog outside, who seems to be abandoned. Margot realizes that it's going to rain soon, so she decides to take the dog with her. But as they head inside, her landlady spots them, and reminds her that pets are prohibited here, so she reluctantly sends the dog back outside into the rain. The following evening, Robert arrives to see the movie again, and Margot attempts to make small talk with him, but he again doesn't respond properly. Later, in the theater, Margot stalks him, stares at him, and imagines herself sitting and conversing with him. After the movie ends, Robert exits the theater, but soon has a change of heart and approaches Margot. He then asks for her number, and she excitedly gives it to him. Over the next few days, the two continue to exchange flirtatious text messages. Margot also informs Taylor about this, who asks about the guy's age. Margot lies and claims that he is 25, but in reality, he is much older than that. She also begins rambling about how funny Robert is, and that he has 2 cats as well, which means he is a caring person. However, Taylor advises Margot to be cautious and not to move too quickly to maintain control over their relationship. One evening, Margot is working alone in the college laboratory when she begins texting Robert again. She tells him that she's hungry, and he suggests they go out to eat. Although this excites Margot, she also feels that she barely knows the guy. She decides to meet him on her own terms and invites him to the lab instead. Not long after, Robert shows up there with her favorite snacks, making her really happy. After handing her the snack, Robert proceeds to leave, but Margot invites him inside and shows him the laboratory. Margot then begins eating the snacks, and there's a stupid ant thinks that the snacks are for it. Robert then decides to check the storage room, while Margot decides to text Taylor that Robert was here, and jokes about him possibly being a serial killer. Upon seeing the artifacts, Robert becomes so intrigued that he summons Margot to the storage room to ask about them. Margot complies and starts talking about the artifacts when suddenly, the door shuts on its own. She blames Robert when the door is locked, but he says it must have locked itself. At this moment, Robert suddenly begins assaulting her in the storage room, but it turns out to be only Margot's imagination. Seeing her in distress, Robert also becomes scared, and ends up breaking the door. This results in significant damage to some artifacts and destroys a whole ant colony. Shortly after, a teacher scolds Margot and explains how she cared for this colony for 17 long years, and Margot destroyed it in a moment. This leaves Margot deeply regretful, but she can do nothing more than apologize. Outside, she thanks Robert for the snacks, and apologizes for her reaction in the storage room. She mentions that she's leaving for her hometown tomorrow for fall break, and suggests they keep texting. They decide not to consider this encounter their first official date. Before parting ways, Margot tries to kiss him on the lips, but he just kisses her on the forehead, so she thinks that he must be a gentleman. The following day, Margot heads to her hometown to spend the vacation with her parents. During this time, she and Robert continue to exchange texts and flirt with each other. Her parents also notice her change in behavior and ask if she is dating someone. Margot then tells them everything about Robert and mentions that he is slightly older than her. Afterward, Margot's mother tells her daughter that it's still too early for her to get into serious relationships, especially since she doesn't really know Robert. One night, Margot decides to spice things up, and sends a seductive picture to Robert, but he doesn't even reply to her, making her feel embarrassed. The next morning, Margot claims that she didn't mean to send that picture and apologizes. She leaves him lots of texts afterward, but he still doesn't reply, causing her to panic. While she is returning from her hometown, he finally texts her, explaining that he was busy at work. Margot then realizes that she doesn't even know his profession, and imagines him working various sorts of jobs. After returning to campus, Margot tells Taylor everything, including how Robert has been avoiding her since she sent him that picture. Taylor scolds her for being so desperate and warns her to take control of the situation, but Margot replies that she really likes him and doesn't want to play games with him. Just then, Robert suddenly texts Margot, and asks her out on a movie date. Despite her friend's warnings, she enthusiastically accepts his invitation. In the evening, Robert arrives to pick Margot up, and they get in his car. But on the way, the door suddenly locks, and she suddenly gets choked by Robert, which turns out to be her imagination again. Later, they end up watching Robert's favorite movie, which Margot finds boring. Margot watches enviously as couples romantically share popcorn from the same bucket and cuddle. Meanwhile, Robert is completely focused on watching the movie, and doesn't notice Margot's attempts to get closer. After their awkward movie date, Robert decides to take her out for drinks. They go to a bar, where Margot tries to gain entry with her ID, but she is denied. At this moment, she finally admits to Robert that she is 20 years old, and he is mad because he assumed she was a little older. Margot then begins to cry, thinking he will end things with her, but Robert doesn't mind her age and gives her a passionate kiss instead. Despite her happiness, Margot is disappointed that a grown man can be such a bad kisser, and she quickly figures out that he must be inexperienced. Following this, the two drink some beers, and in the restroom, Margot calls the friend. Taylor realizes from Margot's voice that she's drunk, and advises her to call a taxi immediately, but Margot has very different plans. She and Robert then decide to go to Robert's house. Upon reaching there, Margot begins looking for the cats he mentioned, but strangely doesn't see them anywhere. Her imagination suddenly starts running wild again. She thinks that Robert's house has a torture chamber where he will hold her captive. Taylor is also surprised that she went home with him. Shortly after, the two begin making out, but moments later, her alter ego asks her to stop this and leave the house, but Margot claims that the guy is sweet when he kissed her forehead. When they are about to start, Margot realizes that she doesn't want to sleep with him, but it's too late now. She thinks that if she says no, it could trigger Robert to hurt her. Margot eventually becomes intimate with him, which is even worse than the kiss. She realizes that this is the worst decision she's ever made in life. After they're done, Margot realizes that this guy is not worth it, and she just wants to leave. She then asks him how old he is, and Robert replies 33. He asks if that is a problem, but she assures him that it's okay. Robert thinks they were committed to each other because of their regular texting, and something truly sincere started between them when they slept together tonight. Margot is the girl of his dreams. But she feels suffocated after hearing this, and claims she must return to her dorm room. Robert is upset. He thought Margot would stay until morning, and he would make her breakfast, but the girl claims her roommate would be worried. Robert then drops her off in his car, but during the ride, Robert is mad at her while demanding to know why she dislikes him. But it's Margot's imagination again, and he safely drops her off at her dorm. And as soon as Margot enters her room, she receives a message from Robert. The next morning, Margot confides everything to Taylor, and declares she doesn't want to see Robert again. Meanwhile, Robert continues to send Margot messages, so Taylor suggests blocking him on her phone, but Margot thinks it's too harsh. She also reveals how he didn't have any cats, and Taylor suggests that maybe he lied about it to come across as a harmless and nice person. Throughout the day, Robert continues to send numerous texts to Margot, but she ignores them. She believes this will only end when one of them dies, and imagines him dying in various ways. In the evening, she composes a long message about being busy with her studies to end the fling, but Taylor believes it's a little too mild. Eventually, Taylor steals her phone, and texts him, "I'm not interested, please stop texting." Margot thinks it's a bit harsh and gets worried, but Taylor reassures her that it's done and advises her not to stress over it. A while later, Robert replies to her, saying he doesn't understand her because he thought they had a good time together. But he still respects her decision and asks her to contact him if she changes her mind. The girls are relieved that it's finally over and Margot can go back to her former life. The scene then shifts to days later, when Margot is at a restaurant celebrating one of her friend's birthdays. She is having a good time until she notices Robert in the same place, drinking alone. Margot doesn't want to confront him, so she informs her friends about her situation, and quickly sneaks out. Later, she receives a text from Robert, claiming that he saw her at the bar. Robert then begins sending her constant messages, expressing how much he misses her. He asks what he did wrong to upset her, or if maybe he was too old for her. Robert's frustration soon turns into aggression and he begins abusing her through text messages. He even accuses her of sleeping with many guys, and he ends the abuse by calling her a whore. The following evening, Margot is working at the theater, when she suddenly notices Robert outside, after which he quickly gets in his car and drives away. Later, Margot heads home alone, but she feels like Robert is stalking her or waiting around. Unfortunately, her phone battery soon dies, and when Margot hears the sound of a car engine, she returns to the theater and calls the police. Margot tells them about her relationship with Robert. She explains how he sent her abusive text messages last night, and today he was outside her workplace. However, the officer says that Robert hasn't technically broken any laws by being outside the theater, so they can't arrest him on that basis. Margot knows that the cops are not going to help her and she is all on her own. So, she contacts Taylor, and the two head to a store to buy some tools for her to defend herself. They also purchase a tracking device, and decide to install it in Robert's car to keep tabs on his movements. Later, at home, the girls look at the tracking device, and wonder how they'll get the job done. But then, the friends get into an argument. Margot doesn't like how Taylor tries too hard to control everything. After a brief argument, Taylor storms out of the room, leaving Margot to install the tracking device on her own. In the next scene, Margot rides her bike to Robert's house to plant the tracking device on his car. She enters Robert's garage and begins the mission. But then, she comes across a dog, which is the same one she found outside her dormitory on the first night she met Robert. Margot is horrified as it finally dawns on her that Robert stalked her that night, and has been obsessed with her since then. Moments later, Robert arrives at the garage and questions Margot about her presence. She accuses him of stalking her and claims that she recognizes his dog. Robert simply asks what's in her hand, and Margot proceeds to use pepper spray in his eyes. Unfortunately, she gets overpowered and ends up spraying herself. Margot wakes up inside Robert's house with burning eyes, and he scolds her for trying to plant a tracking device in his car. Margot requests that he let her go, but he claims that if she gets out like this, he will be blamed for the situation and arrested, no matter what he says in such cases. Robert asks her to sit still until he comes up with a plan that would make him look less like a perpetrator. After this, he begins accusing her of making a fool out of him, as she was the one who approached him first. Margot also gets mad and accuses him of stalking her. Robert admits that he followed her that night, but only because he liked her and wanted to know about her. He reminds her of how she used to flirt with him in the movie theater and make advances. Robert demands to know what he did wrong and, if she didn't like him, why she lied to him. Margot replies that she liked him at first, but after that night, she realized that they were different people. The girl then requests water, but he insists she needs a proper saline solution. Hearing this, Margot wonders if he's been sprayed with pepper before. Robert responds that it's actually because he's a nurse and knows about these things, but Margot never bothered to ask what he did for a living. Here, Margot again pleads with him to let her go. She won't tell anyone about this, and they can go their separate ways, but Robert doesn't trust her. He then heads to the kitchen to get something to ease her stinging eyes. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Margot tries to leave, but she notices the dog at the door and gets scared. She then sneakily calls 911, but Robert catches her in the act. Following this, a brutal fight ensues between them in the house. Margot tries to leave, but he drags her back into the house because everything would be over for him. When he tries to hold her hard, she bites him. During the struggle, a cat escapes, which means Robert did not lie about having cats after all. They continue to fight, and they both end up falling down the basement stairs. Here, Margot accidentally sets the room on fire with a space heater and causes a fire. The fire has blocked the door, and the windows are all locked. Fortunately, Robert finds a safe spot, a drain chamber on the floor. He gets inside and asks Margot to come with him, but she refuses. However, She soon realizes it's the only way she can survive and reluctantly climbs into the crawl space with him. The rest of the house burns down, and the police soon arrive to extinguish the fire. Taylor also shows up, and after the firefighters have extinguished the flames, they tell her that they didn't find anyone in the house. Taylor asks them to check thoroughly. Fortunately, after a while, the cops announce that the two people have been found unconscious in the crawl space, but still alive. Weeks later, a fully recovered Margot rides her bike past Robert's old house with Taylor. The two discuss that Robert has shifted to the coast after leaving his job at the hospital. It turns out she hasn't disclosed the events of that night to anyone, so Taylor tells her she wants to hear the full story one day. In the final scene, Margot is back working at the theater when an older customer strikes up a conversation with her. He appears interested in her and asks for her number, but before we see her response, the movie comes to an end. Okay guys, thanks for watching. See you again in the next video.